Welcome to this video where I show you how you can deploy your application which is built with Payara Micro and deploy it on the Azure platform using a container instance. So these are the steps that we are going to do today. We start by creating locally an application and creating a Docker image around it. We will using Payara Micro for this one. We push it to an Azure container registry. This is the private version of the Docker Hub that you probably all know. And then that Docker image will be used to start a container instance, which then brings your application to the cloud by using the Azure platform. But of course, since we are using any kind of Docker image, you can use other application and application runtimes like Payara server, because it is just a Docker image that we push on the registry and then on the Azure platform. So let's get started with the demo. So I assume that you have created your application and is built as a WAR file, and you can see that that WAR file is called here in my case application.war file. As we said, we are going to use a Docker image, so we need to create a Docker file. That Docker file can be very simple. In this case, it is just starting from the official Payara image, the Payara Micro 5.92, the latest available one, and it copies that application WAR file that we have prepared to the deployment directory. This means that when the container starts up, that your application is deployed immediately and is available after the container is started. So let's build then that image by the docker build command. I will give it a tag test micro, and I will using the local directory containing that Docker file and that application WAR file, and the Docker daemon is building for me the image. This goes very fast in my case because I have built it already before. It's not the first time, so all the Docker layers are already available, and the image is just created and tagged with the correct tag name that we specified. We can also test it locally. In my case, I'm using Docker Desktop for Mac to run it, but of course any system where you can run your Docker images can be used to test out your Docker image that you have just created with the Docker run command. We are going to run it in the background. We need to do a port mapping, so port 8080 will be mapped to my local machine, and I will use that test micro image that I have created. So now the Docker container is starting and we can test out our application. Our application in this case is a very simple one. It just returns me a few information about the environment where the application is running. It's returning the host name and the amount of memory which is assigned to the container. So I can do a curl command to localhost in this case because I have mapped my container to that localhost port 8080. This is the root, it's the same as the application WAR file, the WAR file, and then we have a simple endpoint which is called node. You see that it replies with the information that it's running on server with some identification with a heap of almost 4 gigabyte, which is the default on my Docker machine. That number is coming from the container ID. You see that the server in this case is the same as the container ID. If you specify a name for your container, you will receive there the container name as server name. So now we are ready for the next step, creating that Docker registry on the Azure platform so that we can push our image to that private repository. So now we create the Azure registry so that we can push our Docker image to it. I will show it you to the portal which you are seeing already now, but I will show you also the command line option to create that same Docker registry on the Azure platform. So if you want to do it by command line, then you also have that option. The first thing that you should do is always create a resource group. So I have created here my resource group for putting all the resources like that Docker registry that I'm going to create in that resource group. That resource group can contain then all the related information so that it's easier for the management of those resources, or in the case if you are through with this demo, you can just delete that resource group and everything is cleaned up which is related to that resource group. So we are going to create a new resource group, and the resource that we are going to create is a container registry which can contain that Docker images. You only need a few options to specify in this case. The first one is the URL on which that registry will be available. So I'm going to create a registry with the name Payara Demo .azurecr.io. As you see, this is an URL, so this means that it needs to be unique within the world. This is okay for me now, but of course it's possible that your first choice is not available anymore, and then you need to take some other value here for that registry name. The description, the subscription, sorry, is linked to your account, to Azure account, and I'm going to select the existing resource group that I have created, the location which is nearest to you, and I'm just using a basic size of that registry because I'm not going to use it much, but of course it depends to the use case. If you are going to create a registry with a lot of images, with a lot of activity, it is better that you create a size which is a little bit larger, but the basic is enough for this example. And we start creating, and then after a while we get information that here you see that the deployment on the top right is in progress. After a while you see that you have received a notification that it's done. The same command to do it with the Azure command line interface is with the AZ command program. We are going to create the container registry at the ACR Azure container registry. We are going to create one. We are going to link it with that specific resource group that we have available. You can give it the name, that part of that URL, and here also that type of the size of that registry. But since we have already created it through the portal, I'm going to cancel this command. And you also notice maybe that we have received already the notification that the registry is ready, so then we can start using it. The first thing that we need to do is connect our local registry that we have with that remote one. You can do it with Docker commands, but there is a very handy command from the Azure command line, which is called the ACR login command, which then connects your local registry with your remote registry. So I'm going to log in to that Payara demo registry which I've created. I need more information. I need to specify here the correct parameter that it's name based. Since I already specified my credentials for that for the platform, for the Azure platform, I do not need to specify it here. It's reusing that same token, but of course you can configure that so that you, for instance, need to specify always the password and the username, which is probably more secure than just relying on a token which is available on my computer. The next thing that we should do is retag our image. We have created that test micro tagged based image. We need to use now a specific version, a specific layout of the tag for using that Azure Docker registry. So let's do a Docker tag where we can retag an existing image. So we have initially created the test micro one, but now we need to use the tag name which corresponds to that URL that we have created. So I need to use that payarademo.azurecr.io URL, and I'm going to still keep that name test micro as tag, but I'm going to push it as a v1, which is a best practice that you always explicitly tag us with a specific version. That's a very quick operation because it's just putting a label on the existing tag one, and then we can push that image to our remote registry with Payara. So we put the complete tag name that we have now created, and we can push it to that newly created registry. This will push all the layers, so depending on the speed of your internet and the size of your image, this can take a while. So we see now that all the layers are pushed to that registry that we have created. If you create more images based on the same layers, like if you are reusing the Payara Micro image, for instance, then of course the second image that you are going to push will only push the new layers and will not push the ones from related to Payara Micro. So now we can continue with the next step, which is creating our container instance, which will be running the application that we have pushed through that Docker image. We will need to have a username and password to have access to that private registry this time. So let's change that and request that username and password. So if you go into that resource group, you see that the container registry is created here, and you have the possibility to define some access keys with an admin user, and you can enable that, and then you can see that you have a username Payara demo with a few passwords. I can copy that password and use it later on in the next step, where I create the container registry again through that create resource menu. But now I'm showing the container instance wizard. I'm selecting again that same resource group, and I will specify a container name, for instance test micro. There are a few validations performed, but it's all okay now. The image is not located on Docker Hub or related, so it's not in a public repository but in a private one. And if we specify a private one, then we need to define the image name, and we have defined the image name with that docker tag command that we have performed earlier on. So it was Payara demo Azure cr.io test micro with the version v1. The server where the image is located is the same part as from that image, so it's Payara demo azurecr.io also. We have that username which we have just activated is Payara demo with the password that I've put on the clipboard. There is a Linux type of container. You can also do Windows types with this feature of Azure platform, and you can define the size of your container which is running here. The default is okay with one CPU and 1.5 gigabyte of memory. Of course, if you need more or less resources, then you can select that through that change size link here. The next step that we need to do is saying that we need a public IP address. By default it is on, so that we can access our application, and define the port which need to be exposed. In this case, by default, Payara Micro exposes the application on port 8018 and not on port 80. With the Azure platform, it is not possible for the moment to do a port mapping, so that your application is available on a different port on the IP address, the public IP address, than internally. If you do not like that port 8080 as I'm showing here, then you can change that from within Payara Micro with the port option, where you specify on which port your application needs to be made available. I also need to define a DNS name label, sorry, so that it will be accessible from within the browser, for instance. Again, this needs to be unique, so there are a few um, validations which are performed. So this should be okay. So he reviews it, everything validates correctly, and so now we can create our container. The deployment is in progress. So in the meantime, we can have a look at the command line, how you should create the same thing from from scripts, for instance. There again, you have that AZ program for the command line interface, but this time we do a container create subcommand. We specify the resource group, my resource group again, the name of that container that we are going to create, the image that needs to be used for that container, the DNS label, and the port on which the application is available. You can also, again, here specify username and password if you do not want to use the token which is available on my laptop. So not going to execute it because we have done it already through the portal, which is, by the way, also finished as I saw it happening in the background. So now we can try out our application running on the Azure platform, again with that curl command. And we use then that DNS name that we have specified, so test micro. The location was West Europe.azure container.io. Do not forget to specify the port. It's not on port 80, but on port 8080. The root of our application is the WAR file name, so it's application, and then we have that endpoint, and then you can see that we have a long name related to the server which we are running with the container as a service. You see that the name appears also in the host name, and we have a very long name which doesn't mean anything, but the most important thing is our application is running with the correct heap size of the server that we have specified, the name of the size of the container that we have specified. As you can see, it is quite easy to push your own private images to registry on the Azure platform itself, so that you can place your own applications which are on a location which is not accessible by anyone in the world. And then you can start a container based on that image, and it runs on the Azure platform and can be made easy accessible through the URL that you have provided. If you want to try it out yourself, please also have a look at the website where you can download Payara Micro, for instance, where you can also find more information about Payara and the support. Have fun. Bye.